What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review for Fallout New Vegas after 100%. So let's start that off with some qualifiers. For starters, mostly I am a CRPG channel. I don't cover a lot of Fallout. However, in between CRPGs, recently I asked my audience from a list of a few different games which they'd like me to cover. Fallout New Vegas won, so here we are. However, it occurs to me while making this video, putting a video up titled Fallout New Vegas Review After 100% might bring in some new people who are like, how is this person qualifying 100% if you can even consider New Vegas the type of game to be 100%ed? To answer that question, on my channel I like to review games after I 100% them, which includes a few different things. Achievements is usually the easy public way to approach that, however it does include more than that. And in the case of New Vegas, and also kind of in general, what I was going for was obviously the main story, all of the endings, map exploration, all of the achievements of course, all of the DLC, some of their unique endings, as well as all of the side quests. That said, side quests was the difficult one for this because tracking a lot of those down took a long time. That said, while I certainly don't have a foolproof way of proving all of that, what I do have is a public Steam profile, which you are more than welcome to go check them out, and I can at least prove the achievements there. So all of that said though, let's actually start talking about the game itself here. So Fallout New Vegas, as most people are aware, was developed by Obsidian in the span of about 18 months. Now this is a very highly publicized thing. Obsidian narrowly missed a Metacritic score that would have gotten them a bonus by literally 1 point, and given the time frame that they were given to make this game, there's just a whole lot of drama surrounding the creation of Fallout New Vegas, and is frankly a lot of people's favorite Fallout. However, prior to this review, I personally had never played it. I actually did put up an initial impressions video a while back where I talked about some of the things kind of briefly that I liked and didn't like, but that stuff said, we are using the Ultimate Edition, which was available on Steam, that comes with all of the DLC, etc. For this video and these runs, I didn't personally use mods. I usually try to stray away from mods for the sake of reviews and things. However, I am fully aware that most of the problems I will talk about during this video have been and are definitely solved by mods. And I did want to briefly mention the difficulty settings. So difficulty for Fallout New Vegas is really kind of divided into two things. The actual difficulty, which is the standard Bethesda stuff the game was built on, which is like very easy, hard, or whatever. All of that stuff just modifies enemy damage and health, really. And then the hardcore mode. Hardcore mode is a first crack at a survival mode, basically. As far as I'm aware, it's the first of its kind in the Fallout universe. I believe the follow-up, Fallout 4, actually did make a full-blown survival mode that I think honestly refined a few of these things. But nonetheless, Fallout New Vegas did actually have this hardcore mode, which was fairly similar to survival mode. Hardcore mode isn't too bad for the most part. You have to eat, drink, and sleep and all that jazz. The main thing that got me was the companion deaths in hardcore mode are permanent. So if a companion dies in that mode, they're just dead. So if you're going to run companions, you got to be very careful. But honestly, it adds a certain level of danger to an otherwise save scummy type game, which is the case of most Fallout and, Elder Scrolls style games. So if you want a little more of a challenge and some potential permanence to your decisions, hardcore mode. Now, next up we have character creation. I mentioned this because I want to talk about some of the differences between this and some of the other iterations of Fallout. So we have our special system, of course. However, there are right and wrong choices here. So charisma is pointless, entirely pointless. It does literally nothing because the speech skill in-game you can raise to 100, which actually affects your dialogues and stuff. And the speech skill is just a hard cap of do you have it or do you not. You either have the skill to pass that check or you don't. There's no percentage chance, meaning that any amount of charisma above 1 is a waste of time. Everything else, it kind of just depends on what you want to do exactly. Perception and agility are, I wouldn't say useless exactly, because they're useful for the sake of getting some of the perks later on in the game, as they will have stat requirements for those two things. However, in general, I would find out the minimum amount you need and go from there, because more than that, again, kind of wasting your time. Now, beyond the special stuff, I wanted to mention that the intro to this game is just incredible, actually, where you get shot in your face as the courier and stuff, but for the character creation, you of course wake up in Doc Mitchell's house. He gives you this sort of little health checkup, and during this, it lets you pick your tag of skills, whether or not you want any traits, which are a detriment for a benefit kind of thing, and then you will get perks, but later on as you level up, which will just give you bonuses, and they are available depending on your special stats and things like that. So for the most part, pretty standard Fallout style stuff. And a pretty much copy-paste almost from Fallout 3. There were some changes. Fallout 3 is the closest system to it because, of course, this was made with Fallout 3's engine. So while the setup for your character there is basically the same, I did want to mention that this little health checkup intro after getting shot in the face was just very unique because after all the other Fallouts where you start out in the vault and everything, it was a nice refresher. While I'm not going to go over the entirety of the story because I think most of the people watching this video are well aware of what it is at this point, I do want to talk about the setup. So as I mentioned earlier, the intro to this game is incredible. The game starts with you being a courier that was caught. Somebody wanted the package you were trying to deliver, which is, of course, the platinum ship. A guy named Benny, who wears a unique checkered suit, shoots you in the face, but you survive with 2 bullets in your head. Doc Mitchell patches you back up, and you track Benny down across the Mojave to get revenge first and foremost, but it turns out the platinum ship that you were hired to deliver just happens to involve the fate of the Mojave area and New Vegas. And then from there, of course, we go talking about different factions and their plots to the end. But that's where I want to start talking about the world building for this game. The world building is the best part of Fallout New Vegas. So there's all the role-playing stuff. There's just tons of options for approaching every little thing. There are your skills, of course, your skill checks. You have a speech, barter, things like that you can use in conversation that reflect the skills that you have. There are also options in dialogue for your faction reputation. Are you vilified or idolized? Do these people like you? Do they not? You can get faction-specific dialogue. And on top of that, some perks actually give you dialogue as well. I like that one especially because some of those perks aren't even mentioned as giving you dialogue options, but then you see it and it's like, oh, wow, I actually get options for being this thing. I thought that was incredible, actually. So just right there, you have all these different options for dialogue presented to you, which honestly just really helps with the roleplay and makes you feel like you're actually in character. Now that brings me to the faction reputation. So you can be either vilified to idolized, depending on are you working for or against certain factions. Some factions don't like it if you help other factions, that kind of thing. That said, at the end of Act 1 being go chase down Benny and get your revenge or deal with him however you want. But regardless of your actions, at the end of Act 1, all of your reputation with the main factions gets wiped out. They're like, hey, whatever you did, this was basically like in a prolonged tutorial. You didn't know who all of the big players were. They're going to let it slide. They wipe your faction rep. You can go talk to all of the different faction leaders and still use them. After Act 1, though, all that stuff becomes permanent, which was a nice little touch with their approach to kind of guiding the player and getting them used to how the game mechanics work. And then in addition to that stuff, there are what I like to describe as the main factions and then the minor factions. The major factions are the NCR, the Legion, as well as the Strip, or specifically Mr. House, I guess, with the Strip, however you want to break that one down. And then there's, of course, the sort of anarchist option through Yes Man, which is kind of a fourth one, but he's not really a faction, so there's that. Now, these factions all give you a specific way through the game. So you can side with the NCR, you can side with the Legion, you can side with Mr. House, or if you don't like any of them, or if you start working with them, decide you don't like them, and then kill all of them, or you kill everyone, there's always a fallback option to complete the game through Yes Man, which is a robot that belonged to Benny, which kind of basically provides a fallback just in case no matter what you do, that way the game is always completable regardless of your options, because Yes Man doesn't care what you do. He'll give you some people to talk to, some things you might want to complete, but for the most part he's pretty wide open. That said, all of the other factions usually want you to do specific things, but also deal with minor factions in a certain way. Now, pretty much everybody wants you to side with the Boomers, which are a bunch of explosive, loving isolationists. They're pretty unique. They have a cool quest where you can get a bomber from the bottom of the sea. That was really cool. And there's other small factions as well, such as the, well, I say small, minor in scope of the game, obviously not necessarily a small faction themselves, but you have the chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel that's here. You have the Great Khans, who have all this history with the NCR and a massacre that happened at Bitter Springs. You have the White Glove Society on the Strip, who, like low-key, used to be cannibals. You have the Omertas at the Gomorrah Strip Club, basically, who were more like a typical rendition of gangsters doing terrible things. And then you have the Kings of Freeside, which is kind of like the slums of New Vegas. And they're a gang, but typically speaking, they try to do the best thing they can for Freeside. So again, you just have all these minor factions, and seeing them interact with all of the major factions, and all of the quests you can do for each and every one of those factions, and sometimes, Again, certain factions will want you to deal with minor factions in a certain way. Sometimes there's options you might not necessarily have thought of at first, but there are optimal solutions in some cases. And in my opinion, this is the best content of the game because a lot of this just kind of interweaves with each other in a very impressive manner. And combine that with the fact that all of these factions have just a great backstory. Honestly, they feel very fleshed out. There's all the role-playing options that I previously mentioned that allow these things to come together and connect. Just a lot of really cool stuff going on with the factions, so I wanted to talk about it for a minute there. Now, the other cool world-building stuff is, of course, the environmental storytelling that is kind of a staple of Fallout because, when everyone's dead and there's a post-apocalypse, obviously there's a lot of environmental things that can tell us about the story of what happened. So you do see a lot of that, and one thing I wanted to mention specifically, especially about the map exploration that I talked about earlier. For starters, there's a couple areas that feel very distinct from the rest of the map. Jacobstown's probably the best example of this because you go from the desert of the Mojave to kind of like this little forested area, and I liked that part a lot. That was really cool just to see that shift in landscape. But moreover, something that is simultaneously more shallow than other Fallout games, but also kind of inadvertently makes the world feel more real, is how very small most of the areas in the game are. So there are a few dungeon-esque places, such as like the Repcon facility and a few others that are like genuinely pretty big, like interiors that you have to explore and stuff. However, a great many of the locations, such as an abandoned gas station, you walk in and it's just like a 1 or 2 room abandoned gas station, and that's it. And again, it's technically more shallow, but it feels a little better, honestly, because it's like this is what I would expect if I were to actually go do this in a post-apocalypse setting. Whereas, say, Fallout 4, for instance, every other building has some hidden secret dungeon at the bottom, which makes zero sense. So because of that, New Vegas's world just manages to feel more real and grounded, simply because I walk into a gas station and all I find is an abandoned gas station. I enjoyed that a lot. Now, while you're out there navigating the wastes of the Mojave and trying to decide the fate of it, you might run into companions. There are companions for the base game as well as companions for the DLCs. We're mostly going to talk about the base game companions here, as the DLC companions aren't with you for very long and aren't really allowed outside of their DLC areas anyway. So for the base game, we have 8 of them. All of them are really well done. That said, 2 of them are non-human, basically. They're robots, that is to say a robot dog, a cyber dog, if you will, and Eddie, a prototype iBot. Rex, which is the cyber dog, is the one that I had with me most of the time because he's really cool and he can accompany you alongside of most other companions. And the robot companions typically have a smaller side quest if they have one at all. Rex, for instance, is dying from neural degradation from his implanted brain, so you have to go sort that out at Jacobstown. And then after that, Rex is a fantastic companion. And then you have Eddie, which is an iBot. Of all of them, he is simultaneously the least expressive, but somehow the most adorable at the same time. Now, the other companions are humanoid, might be the best way to put it. There is Arcade Gannon, Craig Boone, Lily Bowen, Raoul, Rose of Sharon Cassidy, otherwise known as Cass, and lastly, Veronica. So for the most part, these people are associated with some of the factions that you'll find around the Mojave, not necessarily the big ones, but nonetheless, for the most part, associated, outside of, I think, Raoul. Raoul's not really involved with anybody. But Arcade Gannon is a member of the Followers of the Apocalypse, who are basically people who want to share information to kind of help humanity, so to speak. Arcade Gannon himself turns out to be a long-lost member, so to speak, of the Remnants, who are part of the Enclave, which has deep roots in Fallout lore, which we're not really going to get into. Craig Boone. Boone was one of my favorites, actually, because he will give you a quest to find the person who sold his wife into slavery, and you can help him kill that person, which is honestly just an amazing quest by itself. But Boone has a lot of issues that you can help him work through, or not. And moreover, Boone is ridiculous damage-wise. Like, he'll just one-shot stuff, especially when you first get him, which is hilarious. Now, there's Lily Bowen. She is a Nightkin, which I thought was just a really cool companion to have. Nightkin are super mutants who are going paranoid thanks to the usage of stealth boys. She's interesting, but for the most part, I feel like she's just kind of meant to be comic relief. She didn't feel as grounded in reality as the rest of them, which, might have something to do with the fact that she's a crazy super mutant, but then there is Raoul, who is a ghoul mechanic and a former gunslinger. He's also really cool, has a very neat backstory. And then there is Cass. Cass has one of the most interesting quests because she's kind of disillusioned with the NCR. However, she still believes in what they do. However, she's like fully aware that there is a lot of corruption going on in the NCR. And you can kind of help her work through some of that one way or the other, as well as kind of get to the bottom of some mysteries about some caravans. And then there is Veronica. Veronica is a disillusioned Brotherhood scribe. We run into her at a trading post, and she has this whole story about helping out the Brotherhood of Steel, who are kind of mired in their own internal politics, and it's slowly killing them from the inside, basically, because of their refusal to change. Veronica sees that and wants to basically change it or not, and you can kind of help with that. But overall, the companions they're really good simply because they have stories that are tied to the main factions, but also the fact that you see a lot of them develop as characters throughout the game. For instance, Boone. Boone has just a tragic backstory. I guess he's your tragic backstory guy, but his wife gets sold into slavery. He was an NCR sniper, but after the things that happened at Bitter Springs with the Great Khans, he just couldn't do it anymore and retired. So there's some real standouts here in terms of companions. There's quite a few of them, honestly. Like, it's not a small amount by any means. Some of the best storytelling, as personal stories go, is definitely with the companions in this game, and they honestly deserve the praise. Now let's talk combat. I don't have a ton to say about combat. Like, there's not a lot to it, to be honest with you. It's standard, old, clunky Fallout 3, Oblivion-style gameplay. It's functional, it's an RPG. I don't expect it to be an amazing shooter. And in terms of the age of this game, even when it was released, I'm not going to say it was like the best, most amazing feeling combat ever, but taking into account the time of the game's release, it's kind of understandable why the combat doesn't feel amazing and shooting weapons and things doesn't like have any weight to it. Combining the skills that, give you access to all sorts of different kinds of weapons, unarmed weapons, melee weapons, all of your explosives, all the cool weapons that come with Gunrunner's Arsenal, as well as the unique stuff that comes from the DLCs. That's where the combat shines, is simply in the variety and the crazy things you can do. I especially enjoyed the amount of guns that were in this game, just the varying kinds, and compared to some other entries, it just felt like they had a lot more variety in terms of weapons available to you, that even though you had just a couple of skills that actually affected combat, like weapons-wise, they did give you tons of options in terms of what weapons you were actually using, which I thought was a cool touch. And that brings us to the DLCs. Now, I'm talking the 4 story DLCs, really, which are Honest Hearts, Dead Money, Old World Blues, and Lonesome Road. So, Honest Hearts, you get to meet the Burned Man. The Burned Man, or Joshua Graham, is actually the former right-hand man of Caesar, of Caesar's Legion. Now, we're going to talk about factions and stuff here in a bit. I'm aware I didn't touch on it yet much, but Joshua Graham has all this backstory built up about him, and there's kind of like this legend of the dude before you actually meet him. So meeting him in Honest Hearts was pretty cool. That said, Honest Hearts itself is really short. They give you like a small canyon to explore. There's like 2 new companions that you can take here and there throughout the story. You can kind of hang out with Joshua Graham for a bit, but basically you're just solving like a tribal feud in Zion, which is an area. And I don't know, it was okay. I wasn't wild about it personally. And then there is Dead Money. Dead Money is simultaneously a really cool story, and I hated it. So they take all your weapons and everything when you actually go to Dead Money, so it's supposed to be like this like weird little survival bit of DLC, where you have to fight all these enemies and you don't have any of your equipment. Now, the story itself was really cool. You get a couple more companions you can find and kind of mess around with, and they all have unique abilities that affect the Sierra Madre, which is the casino you're stuck at, because the story of Dead Money is that you are lured to an isolated casino and strapped with a bomb collar and said, hey, if you don't figure out how to open this casino that hasn't been opened since the apocalypse and help me out here, then you're going to die. So you're kind of forced to do this. Again, as a story, very cool. You actually wind up meeting this guy named Elijah, who has roots with the Brotherhood of Steel, as someone that some of your companions from the main game knew personally. Just a lot of really cool story stuff. The gameplay of it, though, just really brought the whole thing down. At least for me personally. Like, it was a cool story, and if I hadn't wanted to know more about the story, I probably would have quit like halfway through this DLC, because it was not fun, because they take all your items again. And if they would have just given me my weapons, this could have been a much more fun experience. Other than that, very cool story. And then there is Old World Blues. Old World Blues is hands down my favorite DLC from this game. It is absolute nonsense from beginning to end. Old World Blues, you get abducted by these robo-brain types that run a big research facility in a place they call the Big MT, or the Big Empty. And you kind of have to help all of these guys with their research because they're being threatened by this other crazed robo-brain, Dr. Mobius, and it's just absolute nonsense. You get to talk to your own brain at one point because when you showed up, they took your brain out. You get all sorts of just really cool, like, weapons and things from this DLC. It doesn't take itself very seriously, but it is just a dumb blast of fun from beginning to end, and I loved it. Last but not least, we have Lonesome Road. Lonesome Road it's very linear, but it is basically the conclusion to the courier's story from New Vegas. Now, I wanted to talk about this before I talked much about the endings and things. Lonesome Road is largely seen again as just kind of the end of the story. You meet Ulysses, who is someone who followed you, so to speak. He hasn't met you personally, but he has all this stuff to say about how wherever you go, simply by just doing things, you set off all these chain reactions that lead to places like the Divide happening. And the Divide is a separate map where bombs have basically exploded and irradiated the place all to hell. And at the end, once you finally have a fight with Ulysses, where he tries to kill you, you get to decide whether or not to nuke portions of the actual map. Do you send nukes to hit the Legion? Do you send nukes to hit the NCR? Do you not do that? It's a really cool end to the story, so to speak. However, that's not where the actual game ends, which is why I wanted to kind of reel it back and talk about the story a little more before we actually wrap this up. So a little out of order for me typically, but the faction stuff along with the DLCs kind of all lead you to the big battle of Hoover Dam, the second battle of Hoover Dam actually, because the faction relations of this game are kind of at the front and center of it. It's really what all the RPG stuff is about here. Because previously, the Legion, or Caesar's Legion, or Caesar's Legion, I guess, had previously assaulted Hoover Dam but failed to take it. As a result from this failure, Caesar's previous right-hand man, Joshua Graham, was tarred, set on fire, and thrown over a cliff, which he miraculously survived, and then we meet him in Honest Hearts. And that's why he has all this legend built up around him. However, Caesar's Legion isn't content with that. They want this dam, because the dam controls a huge area and is a giant boon to anyone who holds it, which currently is the NCR. So right there, that's what Caesar's Legion wants. However, Caesar's Legion is a ruthless bunch of combined tribes modeled after old Roman culture, Caesar, hence the guy's name. Now, that said, they are ruthless and terrible people. They regularly take slaves. Women are basically all slaves. They crucify people. That's pretty, prominent. They, literally crucify them in the actual sense, not just are mean to them. And they do all sorts of other ruthless things because of the visions held by their leader, Caesar, about what makes a society strong. Now, frankly, these people are nuts and their society is doomed to fail because as soon as Caesar dies, which can happen during the main story, they're doomed. They're going to fall apart, absolutely. Because their second in command, so to speak, is a literal insane person who simply isn't going to be able to hold this together. So they have a shelf life, absolutely. And then you have the NCR. The NCR is the New California Republic that, of course, holds California, and they've moved out towards the Mojave to hold this dam and, send electricity and power and things back to their actual state, so to speak, of California. But moreover, they are a democracy. They have a president and everything. However, they also have a lot of bureaucracy that is riddled with corruption. And because of that corruption, a lot of things that could help benefit their society simply don't happen because of corrupt leaders. And then last but not least, we have Mr. House. Mr. House is the person responsible for the New Vegas Strip, which features prominently, of course, in the game titled New Vegas. Now, this strip is kind of a bit of a quagmire for both the NCR as well as basically anyone in the surrounding area. Not so much the Legion, because they are forbidden from going there by Caesar. The strip basically provides anything off-duty soldiers could want, that kind of thing. So they bleed the NCR dry through caps, and the strip itself is protected by Mr. House and his Securitrons. Nobody's actually met Mr. House. You find out through the course of the game that he is actually a very old guy who's been alive since before the apocalypse and sustained through a variety of means, and basically personally protected most of the nuclear fallout that would have hit the Mojave himself with a sort of defense system that kept a lot of that radiation from happening, which is kind of a cool story reason for why there's not a lot of actual radiation in New Vegas. And if you don't like any of those factions at all, you can, of course, side with Yes Man, like I mentioned much earlier. Now, each of these factions will have you deal with the minor factions of the area in your own way. Some are nicer than others, but basically every single one of these main factions has their flaws and moral choices for you, the character, to decide which one is right or which one you prefer yourself. And then all of that culminates in the Battle of Hoover Dam, which will see you either fighting the NCR or fighting the Legion, fighting someone. Did you help Mr. House use his platinum chip to upgrade his Securitrons, which turns him into walking death machines, basically, which is how he plans on holding the new strip from a literal army. And seeing all of those choices come together against the enemy, which more often than not turns out to be Legate Lanius, which is the second in command of Caesar's Legion, and the fact that even in those cases there's speech options to just completely bypass that last boss fight, just make it a fantastic game with tons of role-playing potential. And with the Lonesome Road DLC kind of putting a cap on it, it just feels like a very well-told story that still allows you to be the courier and role-play the way you want to play it, which I think is ultimately the reason so many people enjoy Fallout New Vegas, because it does the thing that Fallout itself for a long time, or at least the main series entries, have failed to do, and that is provide you, the player, with a lot of role-playing options. Because a lot of times, the main series entries like to pigeonhole you into a specific story, and they lack a lot of the RPG mechanics. The case of Fallout 4, for instance, Fallout 4 has great gameplay. It does not have a lot of great RPG mechanics. And then you compare that to Fallout New Vegas, which has amazing RPG mechanics. However, it has mediocre gameplay, but most people will tell you Fallout New Vegas is their favorite and the best Fallout, specifically because, in my opinion, New Vegas gives people who are playing Fallout the thing they were asking for, which is role-playing mechanics. And as someone who plays a shit ton of CRPGs, I can respect that wholeheartedly. So positives, negatives, and then I'll throw a conclusion at the end here, not that you really need one. Positives, role-playing mechanics, top first and foremost. The factions were really cool. The companions were really cool. I loved all the storytelling. So positives for this game, honestly, more than anything, are just role-playing mechanics and a well-told story to allow you to role-play in. And then we have negatives, because every game has them. That said, again, most of the negatives for this game are in fact fixed with mods. Even now, the game is pretty unstable without mods. Mods will fix a lot of this in most cases. However, the game's very unstable. It crashes pretty frequently. Luckily, because of how often the game saves, it's not usually a big deal. You'll crash the desktop, load it right back up. It's an old game, so it loads very quickly, and you're back basically doing exactly what you were doing in about 5 to 10 seconds. So it's not that big of a deal, but nonetheless, the game crashes pretty frequently, which, yes, I'm aware that had to do with its development cycle and having been made in 18 months, which I'm not really going to hold Obsidian accountable for by any means, more of just an informational thing. And then the other negative, well, it can certainly be fun here and there, and some of the DLC was definitely aimed at ramping this up. The combat itself just feels clunky and it's starting to show its age. Now, that's only really a problem now, and I say problem pretty loosely. It's not that bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's very much so playable. But my point is it's clearly starting to get up there in terms of age. The technology's marching on and it shows, I guess would be the best way to put it. Now, that said, conclusion-wise, I think New Vegas has a story worth overlooking basically everything that is wrong with this game, because the actual role-playing part of it is phenomenal. I actually really enjoyed that part a ton. And considering you can buy that Ultimate Edition for like $20, yeah, that's an absolute buy. You should definitely give this game a try. And having never played it before this review, I had a ton of fun getting to experience this stuff for the first time. It is very well done, even if there are some flaws. All of that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've watched it this long and you're really into Fallout, please don't destroy me in the comments. Too bad. I'm aware that I'm not like the biggest Fallout guy. But regardless of any of that, truly, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a lot of fun making this for you. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And regardless of any of that, though, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.
You got what you were after, so pay up. You're crying in the rain, Pally.
Guess who's waking up over here?
Time to cash out.
Will you get it over with?
Maybe cons kill people without looking them in the face. But I ain't a fink. Dig? You've made your last delivery, kid. Sorry you got twisted up in this scene. From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.